Ben had always loved hiking. The quiet of the forest, the smell of pine needles, and the crunch of leaves beneath his boots always brought him a sense of peace. It was the perfect way to clear his mind and escape the pressures of his mundane job as an accountant. That was why, when he heard about the old forest trail on the outskirts of town, he jumped at the opportunity to explore it. The trail had been closed for years due to a series of strange disappearances, but that only fueled Ben's curiosity. He had heard whispers from locals about hikers who had gone missing, strange lights seen at night, and even ghostly apparitions. But to him, it was all just small-town folklore. After all, he didn't believe in ghosts or curses. He believed in the beauty of nature and the thrill of adventure. He set out early one chilly November morning. The sky was overcast, and the air carried the scent of rain. Perfect weather for a hike, he thought. As he drove deeper into the countryside, the houses became sparser, and the forest thicker. Finally, he arrived at the trailhead, which was marked by a rusted old sign that read, "Closed, enter at your own risk." Ben ignored the warning, feeling a rush of excitement. He strapped on his backpack, turned on his GPS, and started down the trail. The path was overgrown, the ground soft from recent rain, and fallen branches littered the way. The forest around him was eerily quiet, with no sound of birds or animals. The only noise was the steady crunch of leaves under his boots. As he ventured deeper, the trail became harder to follow, but Ben pressed on. The deeper he went, the darker it became, even though it was still early in the day. The trees seemed to loom closer, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. It wasn't long before he lost all sense of direction. The GPS on his phone kept glitching, and no matter which way he turned, it showed him as standing still. "Great," he muttered, stuffing the device back into his pocket. He decided to rely on his instincts. After all, he was a seasoned hiker, he'd find his way back eventually. Hours passed, and the sun was beginning to set. The forest had grown colder, and an unnatural fog began to roll in, creeping along the ground like fingers of smoke. Ben's confidence started to waver. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every now and then, he thought he saw something moving in his peripheral vision, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there. Just as he was about to turn back, he noticed something strange up ahead, a structure, barely visible through the thickening mist. It was a cabin, old and dilapidated, hidden deep within the forest. Ben had seen no mention of it on any maps or trail guides. Intrigued and hoping to find a place to rest, he decided to check it out. The cabin looked as though it had been abandoned for decades. Its wooden walls were covered in moss, and the windows were grimy and broken. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking with every gust of wind. Ben hesitated, but the cold and fatigue pushed him forward. He pushed the door open with a loud groan, stepping into the darkness. The air inside was stale and musty. As his eyes adjusted, he saw that the cabin was a single room, sparsely furnished with a rickety table, a few broken chairs, and a stone fireplace filled with ash. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But what caught his attention was a strange, circular symbol etched into the wooden floor in the center of the room. The lines were jagged and uneven, as if carved hastily. In the middle of the circle lay a bundle of dried twigs bound together with a piece of red string. The air around it felt heavy, almost suffocating. Ben's instincts screamed at him to leave, but curiosity got the better of him. He crouched down to inspect the bundle, reaching out to touch it. The moment his fingers brushed against the twigs, the temperature in the cabin plummeted. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind him, plunging the room into darkness. Panic flared in Ben's chest. He pulled out his flashlight, the beam flickering as he aimed it around the room. The cabin was unchanged, but the air was different now, thick with the scent of decay. That was when he heard it. a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against wood. "Hello?" he called out, his voice shaky. No answer, only the relentless tapping. It was coming from beneath the floor. His heart pounded as he realized the sound was directly below the strange symbol. Against his better judgment, Ben began to pry up the floorboards with his multi-tool. As he lifted the last board, he uncovered a narrow hole, barely wide enough to fit his shoulders. A foul stench wafted up from the darkness below, causing him to gag. Shining his flashlight down, he could barely make out the shape of a ladder leading into a tunnel. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to turn back, but something compelled him to keep going, a morbid curiosity he couldn't explain. He climbed down the ladder, the damp rungs cold against his hands. The air grew colder and thicker as he descended, the darkness swallowing him whole. Finally, he reached the bottom. The tunnel was narrow, the walls lined with what looked like ancient stone. The tapping noise had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. He moved forward, the sound of his breathing echoing in the confined space. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened up into a small chamber. The walls were covered in those same jagged symbols he had seen in the cabin, but this time they were smeared in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar. On it lay an old, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed and worn. Ben's hands shook as he opened it, revealing strange rituals and diagrams written in a language he couldn't understand. The air around him seemed to pulse, the symbols on the walls almost glowing in the dim light of his flashlight. Then, a whisper broke the silence. It was soft at first, barely more than a breath, but it quickly grew louder, echoing off the walls. The voices overlapped, creating a maddening chorus that filled his mind. His vision blurred, and he stumbled back, dropping the book. The shadows in the chamber began to shift, coalescing into a tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes and twisted limbs. It stepped forward, its mouth opening into a jagged grin that stretched impossibly wide. Ben's paralysis broke. He turned and sprinted back toward the ladder, the whispers now a deafening roar behind him. He could hear the creature's heavy footsteps, getting closer with each second. He scrambled up the ladder, not daring to look back. Just as he reached the top and pulled himself out of the hole, the trapdoor slammed shut behind him, trapping whatever was down there. The whispers ceased, leaving only the sound of Ben's ragged breathing. He didn't waste a second. Bolting out of the cabin, he sprinted through the forest, ignoring the branches that tore at his clothes and skin. The mist seemed to part for him, the way out suddenly clear. He didn't stop running until he reached his car. Ben never spoke of what he had seen. He left the town the next day, abandoning his hiking trips altogether. But every so often, he would wake in the dead of night to the sound of that soft, rhythmic tapping, as if something was trying to find its way back to him.